While the whole world watches the seemingly solid alliance between Putin and Xi Jinping, few know there is a deep historical wound that has never healed between these two powers. The territorial dispute dates back to 1860, when China was forced to cede vast expanses of land to Russia after its defeat in the Second Opium War. In recent months, something extraordinary has been happening on Chinese social media. Chinese users have begun posting messages saying, according to history, Russia should return Vladivostok and the vast territory stolen over 100 years ago. This is not just a historical curiosity. It is a symptom of a tension that could redefine the global geopolitical balance. The truth is that behind diplomatic smiles and billion-dollar economic deals lies a century-old rivalry that has never been fully resolved. While Putin and Xi Jinping present themselves as strategic partners against the West, their nations carry deep historical scars that could explode at any moment. To understand the magnitude of this issue, we must go back to the 19th century, when what many historians consider one of the largest forced territorial transfers in modern history occurred. The area we now know as Vladivostok was governed by several Chinese dynasties, including the Ming and later the Qing, before being ceded to Russia through the Treaties of Aigan, 1858, and Beijing, 1860. The Treaty of Aigan transferred more than 600,000 square kilometers of what became known as Outer Manchuria from the Qing dynasty to the Russian Empire, completely reversing the terms of the Treaty of Nerchinsk of 1689, which had established the original border between the two empires. To grasp the scale, the Treaty of Aigan represented roughly 2 million square miles of new territory for Russia. China was in an extremely vulnerable position. The Qing court was ravaged by the Taiping Civil War and under attack from Britain and France, when Russia took advantage of this moment of weakness to carve out massive chunks of Chinese territory. It was not a negotiation. It was practically legalized theft during what the Chinese called a century of humiliation. Beyond territory, Russia gained greater control over regional trade and near-exclusive use of the Amur, Ussuri, and Sungari rivers. This was not just about land. It was about strategic control of trade routes connecting China's interior with the Pacific Ocean. The name Vladivostok in Russian means ruler of the East, a deliberately provocative choice signaling Russia's ambitions in the region. By the Treaty of Beijing of 1860, Russia obtained jurisdiction over lands east of the Ussuri River and south of Lake Khanka, including the settlement of Vladivostok. For the Chinese, this was more than a territorial loss. It was a national humiliation echoing through generations. What makes this story even more fascinating is the geopolitical context in which it happened. Russia was not expanding randomly. It was racing against time to establish a presence in the Pacific before other European powers could do the same. General Nikolai Muravyov, who signed the Treaty of Aigan representing Russia, was known for his bold strategic vision. The name Aigan became so sensitive in Chinese consciousness that Chinese nationalists celebrated the historical renaming of the region, where the 1858 treaty redistributed lands on the left bank of the Amur River to Russia. This name change was not merely symbolic. It was a deliberate move to keep alive the memory of a bitter history with their northern neighbor. During the Soviet era, things worsened. In 1969, the Soviet Union and China nearly entered full-scale armed conflict after a series of clashes that brought the world's two largest socialist states to the brink of a confrontation that could have resulted in a global catastrophe. The most severe incident occurred on Damansky Island, known to the Chinese as Jinbao, located in the Ussuri River. On March 2, 1969, Soviet and Chinese border units clashed in a battle that forever changed Sino-Soviet relations. What began as an ambush by the People's Liberation Army against Soviet border guards quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. The first battle on March 2nd involved only local forces, but 2 weeks later, on March 14th, the Russians launched a second confrontation involving regular army forces of several thousand soldiers and heavy equipment. Russian forces suffered about 60 casualties, dead and wounded, while Chinese forces, numbering around 2,000 at the start, lost several hundred. What makes this story even more dramatic is that possession of Damansky Island was never really an objective for either side. It was a tiny, uninhabited island in the frozen Ussuri River forming the border between the two communist countries. But symbolically, it meant much more. It was about prestige, sovereignty, and the determination not to back down from a rival. Few know that this crisis almost resulted in the first use of atomic weapons between two communist countries. The situation became so severe that Soviet leaders seriously considered using tactical atomic devices against China. Later declassified documents revealed the USSR used secret military threats to coerce Beijing into diplomatic negotiations over the disputed borders. The world was literally on the brink of an atomic confrontation between the two largest socialist powers, and most people were unaware. It was one of the Cold War's most dangerous moments, rivaling the Cuban Missile Crisis in its potential for global catastrophe. One of the most fascinating and little-discussed aspects of this tension is the demographic issue. The Russian Far East has a population of only about 6 million, while across the border, China has over 100 million people. It's like having a huge, nearly empty house next to an overcrowded apartment. This demographic discrepancy creates natural pressures beyond official politics. To grasp its magnitude, imagine a border over 4,300 kilometers long separating this massive population disparity. It is a unique geopolitical situation in modern history. Chinese merchants cross the border daily. Chinese investors buy Russian properties, and there is a growing Chinese presence in Russian cities near the border. For many local Russians, especially in rural areas, this feels like a silent invasion. They see their small towns gradually transformed by the Chinese presence, from Mandarin signs to Chinese restaurants dominating the local culinary scene. What makes this situation even more complex is that the local Russian economy increasingly depends on integration with China. Cities like Blagoveshchensk practically survive on trade with China, yet many locals feel they are losing their cultural identity. The reality includes a particularly painful story: the 64 villages east of the Heilongjiang River. These were Chinese and Manchu communities that, according to the Treaty of Agen, should have remained under Chinese jurisdiction even after the territorial transfer. But in practice, these communities were gradually absorbed by Russian administration. For families who lived in these villages for generations, watching their homeland be incorporated into another country was a traumatic experience echoing to this day. Many descendants still live in the region, but now as Russian citizens, creating a complex identity situation, adding another layer of tension to the territorial question. Despite historical tensions, Russia and China are strengthening cooperation in artificial intelligence technology and have reached record bilateral trade levels, although growth has slowed significantly compared to 2023. But this partnership is more about necessity than genuine affection. Russia needs China as a lifeline against Western sanctions. China needs Russian energy resources and sees the partnership as a way to challenge American hegemony. It is a marriage of convenience, not a romance. Facing economic pressures, Russia is selling stakes in uranium deposits to Chinese companies, strengthening Beijing's regional influence. This is not just a commercial transaction. It is a clear sign Russia is becoming the junior partner in this relationship. For Putin, this must be particularly painful. The man who prides himself on restoring Russian greatness is being forced to sell strategic resources to fund his geopolitical ambitions. It's like selling family jewels to pay the bills. Versions of Chinese maps have renamed Russian territories, including Vladivostok, with Chinese designations. This is no accident. It is diplomacy through cartography. In the digital age, these provocations spread rapidly, creating near-instant diplomatic incidents. Imagine the situation. A Chinese user shares a map where Vladivostok appears with its historic Chinese name, and within hours millions see it. For Russians, it is an unacceptable provocation. For the Chinese, it is merely a historical correction. Meanwhile, China and Russia have intensified military interactions, including joint exercises that have increased in frequency over the decades, with recent maritime drills involving live fire. But these exercises have two sides. On one hand, they demonstrate cooperation against common enemies. On the other, each country uses them to measure the other's strength. It is like two allies training together, but always keeping an eye on one another. Yet something does not quite fit in all this. China demands control over Taiwan, but ignores previous territories now in Russian hands. This is one of the most fascinating paradoxes of Chinese foreign policy. How can China so vehemently claim Taiwan as inalienable Chinese territory while simultaneously accepting vast, historically Chinese, lands remain under Russian control? The answer lies in pragmatic geopolitical reality. Taiwan is a small, strategic island China believes it can reclaim. The Russian Far East is a vast territory defended by atomic devices. The math is simple, but the hypocrisy is evident. Beijing sees China's centennial in 2049 as a global triumph for a powerful China, likely involving restoring historical integrity. This date is not just symbolic, is a real deadline guiding Chinese strategic planning. If China truly intends to restore its historical integrity by 2049, this will necessarily include a re-evaluation of the territorial question with Russia. The issue is not if it will happen, but how and when. The reality is Russia is in an increasingly vulnerable position. Its military adventures in Ukraine drain resources and attention, while its dependence on China grows exponentially. It is like a debtor increasingly reliant on the loan shark, gradually losing bargaining power. There is a risk of underestimating the depth and mutual benefit of the China-Russia economic partnership, but also a risk of overestimating its durability when fundamental national interests collide. The fact is, time is not on Russia's side. Each passing year widens the demographic disparity between the Russian Far East and Northeast China. It is like watching an hourglass where the sand represents power and influence, and everything flows in one direction. The only reason this tension has not exploded into open conflict is the presence of atomic weapons. Both Russia and China possess arsenals capable of destroying the world several times over. It is the modern version of the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. No one can attack because all would lose. But this creates a peculiar situation where tensions are real but must be managed with extreme care. It is like two neighbors who hate each other but both have grenades in their pockets. The growing military alignment between China and Russia poses a challenge to American interests in the Indo-Pacific region. Ironically, American pressure may be forcing these two historic rivals to cooperate more than they naturally would. It is a situation where a common enemy creates a temporary alliance but does not resolve fundamental disputes, like two siblings who fight at home but unite when threatened by the school bully. Several scenarios are possible for the future of this complex relationship. The first is that everything continues as is, with both countries maintaining superficial cooperation while managing internal tensions. The second scenario is gradual confrontation, where an economically strengthened China begins to more openly press for territorial corrections. This could happen through economic pressure, demographic influence, or even international legal claims. The third scenario, and perhaps the most worrisome, is a sudden crisis forcing both countries to choose between their historical territorial ambitions and their current strategic cooperation. The last unresolved territorial issue between the two countries was settled by the 2004 complementary agreement between China and Russia on the eastern section of the China-Russia border. But agreements on paper are one thing. Deep national sentiments are another entirely. History teaches us that historical territorial wounds rarely fully heal. They may be covered by treaties and agreements, but remain sensitive, ready to reopen when circumstances change. The tension between Russia and China is one of the most fascinating and dangerous stories in modern geopolitics. Behind the facade of strategic cooperation lie centuries of resentment, unresolved territorial disputes, and a rivalry that could define the future of Asia and the world. While Putin and Xi Jinping smile for cameras and sign billion-dollar deals, their nations carry historical scars that could erupt at any moment. The question is not if these tensions will eventually surface, but when and how. For us, observers of this complex geopolitical dance, it is important to understand that alliances based solely on convenience rarely withstand the test of time. History is full of examples of partners who became rivals when their fundamental interests clashed. The real question is, in a world where the two largest Asian powers have century-old territorial disputes, how stable can the current world order really be? The answer to that question could determine the fate of billions of people in the coming decades. This was just a glimpse into the hidden tensions shaping our world. If you found these geopolitical revelations intriguing, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content that uncovers the secrets behind international headlines.